The year is 2011. The NFL was back from the brink after a summer-long lockout that threatened to wipe out the season, and every team was making up for lost time. In the draft, Carolina used the number 1 pick on the Heisman winner out of Auburn, Cam Newton, a quarterback built like a linebacker with a cannon arm and the aura of someone who knew he was about to change the league. Denver followed with Von Miller, a pass-rushing freak out of Texas A&M who'd become the soul of their defense for the rest of the decade. Cincinnati took A.J. Green ahead of Julio Jones, and even though Jake Locker, Blaine Gabbert, and Christian Ponder were all-time quarterback busts, studs like Patrick Peterson, J.J. Watt, Richard Sherman, and Jason Kelsey, just to name a few, made up one of the most loaded draft classes of all time. But as much as 2011 was about the next generation, the preseason narrative was about Aaron Rodgers, fresh off a Super Bowl win where he'd shredded the Steelers and silenced every critic. Rodgers entered the year with the Packers favored to repeat, and his name now mentioned alongside Brady, Brees, and Peyton Manning, who was in the midst of a series of neck surgeries, putting his availability for the season in serious doubt. Elsewhere, the Patriots were out for revenge after falling short in the playoffs, uniting Tom Brady with a washed-up Chad Ochocinco, and adding the laziest player in NFL history, Albert Haynesworth, to bolster the defense. But the Eagles had made the loudest splash of the offseason, signing Nnamdi Asomugha, Jason Babin, and Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie to build a super team, at least in the eyes of backup quarterback Vince Young, who dubbed them the Dream Team. And the New York Jets, after back-to-back AFC Championship appearances, were on a mission to finish the job. Now that football's in full swing and basketball's kicking off, I've teamed up with DraftKings Sportsbook to bring you the perfect way to get in on the action. Right now, new customers can sign up using my promo code BEACHKID, bet just $5 and get 3 months of NBA League Pass on us, and get $300 if your bet wins paid in bonus bets. Love the thrill of live betting? With DraftKings, you can bet live on star player props and in-progress games as they happen, so don't miss your shot to take advantage. New customers bet $5 and get $300 paid in bonus bets if your bet wins. Plus, get 3 months of NBA League Pass no matter what using promo code BEACHKID. On opening night at Lambeau Field, the defending champion Packers hosted Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints, in a game that instantly reminded everyone why they'd missed football so much. Rodgers orchestrated 3 touchdown drives in the first quarter alone, while Brees answered with touchdown passes to Devery Henderson and Jimmy Graham to kick the year off in shootout fashion. Rookie Randall Cobb returned a kickoff 108 yards for a touchdown, and the Packers won 42-34 in a primetime thriller that gave us a taste of what was to come for the next 17 weeks. In New England, Tom Brady threw for 517 yards on Monday Night Football against Miami. Brady to Welker produced a 99-yard touchdown, and the Patriots dropped 38 on the Dolphins with ease. It was clear New England's offense was going to score on anyone, but the defense was another story. Then came the league's newest phenomenon. Expectations were high being the first overall pick and all, but no one could have predicted Cam Newton would throw for a record 422 yards in his debut. 1 week later, he followed it with 432 yards. The Panthers lost both games, but Newton looked like a prototype for the future. Even in defeat, he turned one of the worst teams in football into must-see TV. Meanwhile, the Buffalo Bills were the league's biggest surprise. Led by Harvard gunslinger Ryan Fitzpatrick and running back Fred Jackson, the Bills started 3-0. Their signature moment came in Week 3 when they erased a 21-0 deficit to stun the Patriots 34-31, snapping a 15-game losing streak against New England. The game ended with Tom Brady throwing 4 picks, and for one glorious Sunday, the Bills were kings of the AFC East. But they weren't the only surprise among the NFL's bottom feeders. The Detroit Lions, long the joke of the league, were looking dangerous too. With the Stafford to Megatron connection in full force, Detroit would open the season 5-0. In San Francisco, rookie head coach from Stanford Jim Harbaugh was transforming the franchise. The 49ers had been bad for a decade, but Harbaugh brought attitude and structure. His quarterback Alex Smith, a former first overall pick written off as a bust, grew into the proficient game manager we would come to know. The Niners opened 3-1 with a clear identity and a nasty defense led by Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, and Justin Smith. Whether everyone realized it or not, they were legit contenders. But unlike the 49ers, the Eagles fell flat immediately, opening 1-3, including a loss to the Falcons in Michael Vick's Atlanta homecoming. Their high-priced defense was actually complete trash, and Vince Young's Dream Team comment from the summer became a meme by October. In New York, the Jets were not delivering on the promise of their back-to-back AFC Championship appearances. The offense was turnover-prone, and Rex Ryan's defense fell off a cliff. They started 2-2, indicating the past 2 seasons were likely their peak. But the Cowboys squandered what would have been a Week 1 win against the Jets. Tony Romo tore New York apart for 3 quarters before choking the game away in the 4th. He then played through a punctured lung and broken ribs to beat the 49ers in Week 2, which was one of the gutsiest games of his career. But in Week 4, he threw 2 pick-sixes against Detroit, and it all came crashing down once again. His season was coined the Romo Coaster. And after losing that Week 1 shootout to Green Bay, New Orleans rebounded to 3-1, building momentum toward yet another playoff run while Brees was one of multiple quarterbacks in for a historic year. By the time September ended, one thing was clear. 2011 wasn't going to be normal. The Packers looked completely unbeatable, the Lions were undefeated, and Cam Newton was breaking rookie records. But the first few weeks were also marred by devastating knee injuries, and no team suffered more than the Kansas City Chiefs. After losing promising tight end Tony Moeaki in the preseason, they watched their 2 best players, safety Eric Berry and running back Jamal Charles, go down with torn ACLs in the opening 2 weeks. In Week 3, the Titans lost breakout wide receiver Kenny Britt to the same fate, another ACL tear that derailed one of the AFC's most exciting young wideouts. Still, after a summer where it looked like there might not be any football at all, the NFL returned with one of the best opening months the league had ever seen. If it wasn't obvious to everyone in September, it was by the end of October that Jim Harbaugh had turned the 49ers into an absolute problem. And in Week 6, the Niners faced the Lions, another team trying to prove they were for real. In one of the most physical games of the year, San Francisco won 25-19, and the handshake that followed became legend. Harbaugh sprinted toward Lions head coach Jim Schwartz, celebrating a little bit too hard, and Schwartz snapped, chasing him halfway down the field. The handshake game was born, a moment that perfectly captured what Harbaugh had built, a team that was talented, fearless, and obnoxious. By the end of October, the 49ers were 6-1, one of the scariest groups in football. As was the Saints' offense. Every week, Drew Brees was lighting up the scoreboard, and in Week 7 on Sunday Night Football, they dropped one of the most lopsided beatdowns in NFL history. A 62-7 win over the Manningless Colts where Drew Brees threw for over 300 yards and 5 touchdowns. And the game became symbolic of 2 franchises going in opposite directions, as the Colts were to be without Peyton Manning all season, tanking for Andrew Luck. For Dallas, the bright spot was rookie running back DeMarco Murray, who exploded for a 253-yard game against the Rams, breaking Emmitt Smith's single-game rushing record for the franchise. Murray's performance gave Dallas the balance it had been missing for years, yet the Cowboys found themselves constantly hovering around 500. In Oakland, tragedy struck on October 8th when legendary owner and rebel spirit of the Raiders, Al Davis, passed away at 82 years old. That week, the Raiders honored him the only way possible, by winning in his memory, beating the Texans in an emotional 25-20 game, a final tribute to one of football's most iconic figures. But a week later, quarterback Jason Campbell broke his collarbone, and the Raiders, desperate to stay in the hunt, made a perfectly bold Raider-like move, trading 1 first-round pick and 1 second-round pick for Carson Palmer in an attempt to save their season. And despite the loss to them, the Houston Texans were looking like the real deal. Arian Foster was in his prime, defensive coordinator Wade Phillips had transformed their defense, powered by a rookie J.J. Watt, so even with injuries to Andre Johnson and Mario Williams, Houston was a legitimate AFC contender for the first time in franchise history. But the Falcons were struggling to rediscover their form. After their 13-3 breakout in 2010, they were stuck in mediocrity at 4-3 despite the addition of Julio Jones. But the story of October was the Denver Broncos, who had started the season 1-4 under quarterback Kyle Orton. Fans were chanting for Tim Tebow, and in Week 7, John Fox gave in. Tebow got his first start against the Miami Dolphins, and for 3 quarters, Denver did nothing offensively. But in the final 5 minutes, Tebow led 2 touchdown drives and tied the game. The Broncos ultimately won in overtime, and a legendary half-season run began. Tebow was unpredictable, inefficient, and impossible to explain, but Denver was alive. The Green Bay Packers stood at the top of the standings, finishing November still undefeated at 11-0, and Aaron Rodgers was putting together one of the greatest quarterback seasons in NFL history. He dropped 45 points on both the Chargers and Vikings in back-to-back weeks, tossing 4 touchdowns in each game. Rodgers' passer rating sat at 128 through November, something no one had ever done that deep into a season. But football was not as easy for the rest of the league. In early November, the Giants looked ready to come for the Lombardi again. Eli Manning led them into Foxborough and beat the Patriots with a last-minute touchdown drive that mirrored Super Bowl 42. But the second you believed in the Giants, they would disappoint. They followed that huge win with a 4-game losing streak, blowing close games and getting humiliated by the Saints. But Victor Cruz was putting together his out-of-nowhere 1,500-yard season, and Eli was having his best statistical campaign. Yet, they couldn't string consistent weeks together. And after his improbable comeback win in Miami, Tim Tebow's hype grew exponentially. He beat the Raiders in Oakland, then the Jets on Thursday night, driving 95 yards in the final minutes for the winning touchdown. The media was obsessed with him, and it didn't matter that he could barely complete 10 passes a game. Tebow was somehow winning anyway. Each week, he'd play terribly for 55 minutes, then pull off a miracle. Meanwhile, the Patriots, after falling to the Giants in early November, would not lose again in the regular season. Rob Gronkowski was putting together the greatest season ever by a tight end, and by month's end, he was about to break the record for the most touchdowns by one in a season. The defense was statistically mediocre, but New England was headed for another number 1 seed, while the Ravens and Steelers were engaged in their annual feud. Their Week 9 showdown in Pittsburgh epitomized AFC North culture: hard hits, low scores, and personal tension. Late in the fourth quarter, Joe Flacco drove the Ravens 92 yards and threw a game-winning touchdown to rookie Torrey Smith with just seconds left. Baltimore had swept Pittsburgh and took control of the division. And in the NFC, Drew Brees was continuing to operate at a level short only of Aaron Rodgers. In Week 12, he hung 49 points on the Giants, threw for 363 yards, and added 4 touchdowns. Through November, Brees was on pace to finally break Dan Marino's single-season passing yardage record. Elsewhere, the Chicago Bears were climbing into the playoff race, with Matt Forte carrying the offense and the defense forcing turnovers in bunches. But Jay Cutler broke his thumb trying to make a tackle after an interception in Week 11, so Caleb Haney took over and the offense was doomed. A team that looked dangerous was finished in an instant. In Cincinnati, nobody expected much, but Andy Dalton and A.J. Green were establishing themselves as a formidable rookie duo. The Bengals were way ahead of schedule. It wasn't their time yet, but you could tell they were going to be solid for years to come. And in Houston, Matt Schaub went down with a season-ending injury, but instead of collapsing, the Texans rallied behind rookie T.J. Yates. They were flawed but tough, even if their season could only go so far without Matt Schaub. The story of December was still the undefeated Packers chasing history. They were 13-0, so close to the third perfect regular season of the modern era. But in Week 15, the shorthanded Kansas City Chiefs, coached by Romeo Crennel and quarterbacked by Kyle Orton, a man who'd been released by Denver earlier that year, led the Chiefs to a shocking 19-14 win. Perfection was dead, but Green Bay shrugged it off and finished a league-best 15-1 with Rodgers locking up the MVP. And the very next week, on Monday Night Football against the Falcons, Drew Brees broke Dan Marino's single-season passing yardage record from 1984. The crowd erupted as Brees hit Darren Sproles for a touchdown on the record-breaking play, and fittingly, the Saints clinched the NFC South in the process. The Saints won their final 8 games, and Brees would be named Offensive Player of the Year. But his tight end Jimmy Graham was putting the finishing touches on a season nearly as amazing as Rob Gronkowski's, ending with over 1,300 yards and 11 touchdowns. However, in Denver, reality caught up. After 2 more magical wins against the Vikings and Bears, the Broncos lost 3 straight to end the regular season. But thanks to the mediocrity of the AFC West, they still backed into the playoffs at 8-8. December also brought one of the most gruesome moments of the year. In Week 16, Adrian Peterson tore both his ACL and MCL against the Redskins. He'd been one of the few bright spots in an otherwise dismal Vikings season, still running like the most violent back in all of football. But the injury looked catastrophic, sending the Vikings into the offseason with their franchise cornerstone in doubt. Nobody could have guessed it would set up one of the greatest comebacks in NFL history just a year later. Elsewhere, Gronk finished the season with 1,327 yards and 17 touchdowns, both NFL records for a tight end. The Baltimore Ravens and Pittsburgh Steelers slugged it out for the AFC North, splitting the same 12-4 record, but Baltimore earned the tiebreaker thanks to their season sweep, giving them a first-round bye. In the eyes of many, they had the best defense in football, and the soon-to-be Defensive Player of the Year in Terrell Suggs. which ruffled the feathers of many fans who thought that Jared Allen and his near-record 22 sacks was more deserving of the award. The Texans finished 10-6 and clinched the AFC South, but the most electric player in the division was Jaguars running back Maurice Jones-Drew, who won the rushing title with over 1,600 yards. The Bengals were relegated to wild-card status with the Steelers, but in the NFC, the 49ers closed the season as one of the league's most complete teams, controlling nearly every game. Their defense allowed the fewest rushing yards in the NFL and led the league with 38 forced turnovers. They ended 13-3 and locked down the 2 seed. The New York Giants, on the other hand, simply refused to die. After stumbling to 8-7, they entered Week 17 in a winner-take-all matchup with the Cowboys for the NFC East. Eli Manning outdueled Tony Romo in prime time, connecting with Victor Cruz for a 74-yard touchdown that set the tone for a 31-14 win. And the Detroit Lions clinched their first playoff berth since 1999, behind Calvin Johnson's league-leading 1,700 receiving yards. Stafford threw 41 touchdowns while joining Tom Brady and Drew Brees in throwing for over 5,000 yards this year. The Falcons rounded out the NFC field, sneaking in at 10-6, but they were not to be trusted. Wildcard weekend kicked off with a first in franchise history. In Houston, the Texans finally hosted a playoff game after a decade of existence, and they made it count. Late in the second quarter, J.J. Watt read Andy Dalton's eyes and picked off a pass, returning it 29 yards for a touchdown. That play broke the game open and became Watt's first signature moment. Houston controlled the rest of the afternoon, winning 31-10 and notching their first ever postseason victory. And that same night in New Orleans, the Saints hosted the Lions for a track meet. Both quarterbacks came out firing, with Stafford hitting Calvin Johnson for chunk plays early, but the Saints' offense was relentless. Drew Brees completed 33 passes for 466 yards and 3 touchdowns. The game featured over 1,000 combined yards of offense, but the difference was execution. New Orleans converted 3 fourth-down attempts and overcame 211 yards from Megatron to win 45-28. Then on Sunday in New York, the Giants hosted the Falcons, a matchup of polar opposites. Atlanta all finesse, New York flaunting a physical defensive front, and the difference showed immediately. The Giants' defensive line smothered Matt Ryan, and the Falcons' offense failed to score a single point. There are only 2 points coming from a safety. Comparatively, Eli Manning was sharp and composed, throwing for 3 touchdowns. The Giants rolled 24-2, and the 9-7 underdogs who barely made the postseason were up to something again. The weekend closed with the 8-8 Broncos hosting the 12-4 Steelers, and everyone assumed this was where Tebow mania would die. Pittsburgh had one of the league's best defenses, while Denver's run had practically been built on prayers. But after a back-and-forth regulation that ended tied at 23, the game went to overtime. And on the very first play, Tebow fired a strike across the middle to Demaryius Thomas, who caught it in stride, stiff-armed Ike Taylor, and sprinted 80 yards for the walk-off touchdown, making for the shortest overtime in NFL history and one of the most unbelievable moments in playoff history. The 2011 divisional round was one of the greatest weekends of football ever played, and it opened in San Francisco as the 49ers faced the Saints. Brees threw for another 462 yards and 4 touchdowns, but Alex Smith delivered the game of his life. In the fourth quarter alone, the lead changed 4 times. Darren Sproles caught a 44-yard touchdown, Alex Smith sprinted down the sideline for a 28-yard score to take the lead, only for Brees to respond instantly with a 66-yard catch-and-run touchdown to Jimmy Graham that silenced the crowd. But Alex Smith had one last drive in him. After a huge pass to Vernon Davis that got them into Saints territory, Smith hit Davis again over the middle for the game-winning 14-yard touchdown. Davis collapsed in the end zone, sobbing as teammates surrounded him. Harbaugh's 49ers had just beaten one of the most explosive teams ever, and the catch 3 was born. Later that night, the Broncos headed to Foxborough. Tebow mania was cute, but it was no match for Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. New England dismantled them. Tom Brady tied a postseason record by throwing 6 touchdowns, and Gronk caught 3 of them. By halftime, it was 35-7. Final score 45-10. The Patriots advanced with authority, and Tebow's run, as improbable as it was, ended with a brutal thud. The following day in Baltimore, the Ravens and Texans scrapped it out in a game reminiscent of the 2000s. Baltimore's defense eventually proved too much, and Ed Reed sealed the game with an interception in the final minutes to win 2013. It wasn't pretty, but it was enough to earn a trip to New England for an AFC title showdown. And for the divisional finale, the near-perfect Packers had won 21 of their last 22 games dating back to the previous year. But like 2007, when the Giants came to Lambeau, everything fell apart. Rodgers was uncharacteristically off after the team rested in Week 17. And right before halftime, Hakeem Nicks made the kind of play that defines an entire postseason, hauling in a 37-yard Hail Mary touchdown. That play broke the Packers' spirit, and the Giants continued to bully Green Bay on both sides of the ball. Eli Manning threw for 330 yards and 3 touchdowns in a massive 37-20 upset win over the Super Bowl favorites. By the end of the weekend, the Final Four was set. Patriots-Ravens, Giants-49ers. 3 elite defenses, 2 legendary quarterbacks. In Foxborough, the AFC Championship between the Pats and Ravens became an instant classic. It was a game defined by missed opportunities and 1 missed kick. The Patriots led 23-20 in the final minute, but Flacco drove Baltimore to the 14-yard line. On second down, he hit Lee Evans in the end zone, and for a split second, it looked like the Ravens had taken the lead. But cornerback Sterling Moore punched the ball out at the very last instant. 2 plays later, Billy Cundiff lined up for a 32-yard field goal to tie the game, and hooked it wide left, completely blowing it. In the NFC Championship, the Giants and Niners went to war at Candlestick, but the game fell in the balance of 49ers punt returner Kyle Williams. In the fourth quarter, he muffed a punt that led to the Giants' go-ahead touchdown. Fortunately, the Niners tied it up, but in overtime he fumbled again, and the Giants recovered. A few plays later, Lawrence Tynes drilled the field goal to win 2017, sending New York to the Super Bowl to face New England again. 4 years earlier, the Giants had shocked the world, ending the Patriots' perfect season. Now the Patriots had their chance at revenge. The game opened nervously. Tom Brady's first pass was flagged for intentional grounding in the end zone, resulting in a safety. But Brady recovered, finding rhythm, hitting Aaron Hernandez, Wes Welker, and Deion Branch underneath. Then he connected with Danny Woodhead for a touchdown to finish a 96-yard drive just before halftime, giving New England a 10-9 lead. By the third quarter, the Patriots were in control. Brady opened the second half with another long drive capped by a touchdown to Hernandez to take a 17-9 lead. Eli chipped away though, leading 2 drives that ended in field goals to cut it to 17-15 late in the third, setting up yet another heart-stopping finish. So with just under 4 minutes left, pinned at their own 12, Eli dropped back and uncorked a perfect deep ball down the left sideline to Mario Manningham. The coverage was perfect. 2 defenders draped over him, but Manningham somehow tapped both feet in bounds, hauling in one of the greatest throws of all time. It was the new Tyree moment. That play flipped the field and changed the game. Eli methodically moved the Giants down to the 6-yard line, and with just over a minute left, Ahmad Bradshaw burst through the line and then froze. The Patriots had let him score on purpose to save time. He tried to stop at the 1-yard line, but his momentum carried him into the end zone. Still, Giants 21, Pats 17. Giving Brady the ball back with 57 seconds to go. He hit Branch, then Hernandez, marching toward midfield. But with 5 seconds left, only 1 shot remained. He heaved a perfect Hail Mary throw into the end zone, and for a split second it looked like it might actually happen. The ball bounced off a crowd, floated in the air, and just missed a diving Rob Gronkowski by inches. The confetti fell, and Eli Manning was now a 2-time Super Bowl MVP, both at Brady's expense. He finished the postseason with 1,219 passing yards, the most in a single playoff run in NFL history. It was validation. A 9-7 team that lost 4 straight in November was now a Super Bowl champion. Tom Coughlin had gone from hot seat to legend, and their pass rush, led by Jason Pierre-Paul, Justin Tuck, and Osi Umenyiora, had beaten the best quarterbacks alive in consecutive weeks. It wasn't luck. The Patriots, meanwhile, were left shattered, the Lombardi Trophy slipping through their fingers again. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, let's relive every NFL season of the 2010s.